Listen close, because this is the kind of story that doesn't let you look away. A tale so fierce, so heartbreaking, so utterly defiant that it still echoes across the canyons and dry washes of the 1880s frontier. In a land where lines were drawn in blood, between white and Apache, between law and survival, between duty and desire, one woman made a choice so dangerous it rewrote her name in every town from Arizona to the border. It began with a single night, a single knock, and a man who should have been dead to her walking back into her life, asking the one question she could never answer quietly. Will you come with me, or let me disappear again? The wind howled low across the Chiricahua foothills, carrying the sharp bite of winter down from the peaks. Inside the Boone trading post, the air was thick with the smell of old pine, lamp oil, and the faint metallic tang of tin goods stacked along the walls. The single lantern on the counter threw a weak, trembling circle of light that barely reached the corners. Sable Kane stood motionless at the frosted window, one palm flat against the cold glass, fingers spread as though she could press the darkness back. She had stopped crying months ago. The tears had frozen somewhere between the last promise Chato whispered and the first empty dawn that followed. Now there was only this hollow ache, steady as a heartbeat she could no longer trust. 1 year, one full turning of seasons. She had marked every one on the small calendar nailed above the ledger. Spring wildflowers she never picked, summer heat that pressed against her skin like accusation, autumn leaves that fell like unanswered letters, and now this winter that refused to let anything live. The bell above the door gave a single, deliberate chime. Not the wind. The wind would have rattled the whole frame. This was one clean note, then silence so deep it pressed against her eardrums. Sable's breath caught. She glanced toward the stairs. Etta Crow had already retired, her door closed against the cold. Thane Boone was 2 days south in Silver City, chasing a shipment of wool that might never arrive. The post was hers tonight. Only hers. She crossed the floorboards slowly. Each step creaked like a warning. The shadows between the shelves swallowed the lantern light. She felt the dark brush her shoulders as she passed. Her hand hesitated on the latch. Lock it. Pretend the sound was nothing. Let the night keep its secrets. But some stubborn ember inside her, stubborn or stupid, would not let her turn away. She lifted the bar, pulled the door inward. A tall figure stood just inside the threshold, snow dusting the wide brim of his hat and the shoulders of his heavy coat. He did not move. Neither did she. For a long heartbeat, the only sound was the wind clawing at the eaves. Then he raised one gloved hand and lifted the hat. Lamplight found the new scar that curved along his left cheekbone, jagged, still faintly red at the edges. His hair was longer now, tied back with a strip of leather, and there were deeper lines at the corners of his eyes, as though the year had carved them with a dull blade. But the eyes themselves were the same, dark, steady, looking at her the way they always had. Like she was the only thing worth seeing in a world that kept trying to blind him. Chato, she breathed. The name felt foreign on her tongue after so long of not daring to speak it. He stepped forward just enough for the door to swing shut behind him. Snow scattered across the floorboards like broken glass. He did not smile. He did not reach for her. I promised I would come back, he said quietly. His voice was rougher than she remembered, scraped raw by too many nights of whispering orders, too many days of running. Sable felt something crack inside her chest. Anger, grief, relief, all at once. She wanted to slap him. She wanted to bury her face against his coat and sup like the girl she no longer was. Instead, she stood frozen, arms wrapped tight around herself, as though she could hold everything in place. You took your time, she said. The words came out thinner than she intended. His gaze never left hers. There was no safe way to send word. Every rider between here and the reservation is watched. Every letter opened. If they had found my name on paper with yours. He let the sentence die. They both knew the rest. She looked away, toward the window. The snow outside had thickened. The world beyond the glass was gone. And now you're here, with the army still hunting you, with a price on your head. Her voice cracked on the last word. Did you think I would just open the door and everything would be the same? No, he spoke without hesitation. I thought you might shoot me. The honesty of it stung worse than any lie could have. She laughed once, a short, bitter sound. I thought about it, every night for the first 3 months. After that I just stopped thinking. It hurt less. Chato took one careful step closer, not crowding, just enough to let her feel the warmth of him through the cold air between them. I did not come to ask forgiveness, Sable Kane. I came because the promise was mine to keep, and because I needed to know if the woman who waited was still alive inside the woman who stands here now. Her throat closed. She wanted to tell him the woman who waited had died somewhere between the first frost and the last letter that never came. She wanted to tell him she had learned how to breathe without him, how to smile at customers, how to answer Etta's worried glances with calm lies, but the words would not come. Instead, she asked, "How long can you stay?" "Not long." He glanced toward the door. "They are closer than I would like. A patrol passed the ridge 2 days ago. They have dogs now. Good ones." Her stomach twisted. "Then why risk coming here at all?" "Because a promise made in blood is not broken by distance." He met her eyes again. "And because I had to see your face before I decided whether to keep running alone." Silence stretched between them, long, heavy, filled with everything they had not said in a year. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of hooves on the frozen trail outside. Not close yet, but coming. Chato's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at his belt. Sable's pulse slammed against her ribs. Neither of them moved toward the door. The wind rose again, rattling the shutters. The lantern flame dipped low, almost guttering out. Sable looked at the man who had once held her heart so carefully it had almost stopped hurting. Now he stood here, scarred and hunted. And the only thing she knew for certain was that whatever happened next, the girl who used to wait by the window would never stand in this room again. The hoofbeats grew a fraction louder. Chato's voice was barely above a whisper. "I will not ask you to hide me, not tonight. But if you tell me to leave right now, I will go. And this time I will not come back." She stared at him, really stared, at the new scar, at the exhaustion he could no longer hide, at the man who had walked through hell to keep a promise he never had to make. Her hand lifted, trembling, and rested lightly against the front of his coat. Snow melted instantly against her palm. "I don't know what I want," she said, the truth scraping her throat raw. "But I know I'm not ready for you to disappear again." The hoofbeats were still distant, but they were real, and the night was far from over. The lantern flame guttered as the door thudded shut behind Chato, sealing out the wind but not the cold. Snowflakes that had ridden in on his coat began to melt on the floorboards, darkening the wood in small, irregular patches. The smell of wet wool and pine smoke filled the narrow space between them. Sable stayed where she was, back against the counter, fingers curled so tightly around the edge that her knuckles showed white. She could feel the grain of the wood biting into her palms, grounding her, keeping her from shaking apart. Chato did not move closer. He stood in the middle of the room like a man who knew he had no right to any of it anymore. Snow still clung to the shoulders of his coat, to the brim of the hat he held in one hand. When he shifted his weight, the movement pulled the sleeve back just enough to reveal the dark, stiff stain on the cuff. Blood, dried to rust. "They're tracking me," he said. The words came out flat, matter of fact, the way a man might report the weather. "Not close yet, but close enough." Sable's throat worked. She wanted to scream at him. Why now? Why here? Why after a whole year of silence that carved her hollow? But the sound lodged somewhere behind her breastbone and refused to rise. Instead, she felt the old anger coil tighter, hot and useless. "You look like hell," she said finally. Her voice sounded thin, brittle. "I feel worse." He gave the ghost of a shrug. "The scar's new. The rest is just older." She stared at the mark on his cheek. It pulled the skin taut when he spoke, a reminder that the year had not been kind to either of them. She hated that she still noticed, hated that she still cared enough to notice. "You should have stayed gone," she whispered. "Maybe." His eyes held hers. "But I didn't." The silence stretched again, longer this time, heavy with everything neither of them knew how to say. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves like something grieving. Inside, the lantern hissed softly, eating the last of the wick. Sable's gaze dropped to the blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt." "Not bad." He flexed his hand once, testing. Old wound opened again. Cold makes it stiff. She took one step forward, then stopped. "You can't stay here bleeding on my floor. I can leave." He said it quietly, without threat or plea. "Right now, before the patrol circles back," and the words landed like stones in her stomach. "Leave. Again." She pictured the door opening, the night swallowing him, the empty space he would leave behind. Again. The thought made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with anger. She swallowed. "You'll freeze out there." "I've frozen before." "Not in my doorway, you haven't." He studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded once. She jerked her chin toward the back of the store. "There's a trapdoor behind the counter, under the flour sacks. It leads to the root cellar. It's cold, but it's dry, and no one looks there unless they know to look." Chato did not thank her. He only moved. Slow, careful, like a man who had learned not to trust sudden motion. When he passed her, she caught the faint scent of horse sweat, pine resin, and something coppery. Blood. Always blood. She followed him to the counter, knelt, and shoved aside the heavy sacks. The trapdoor was old, warped from years of damp. The hinges groaned when she lifted it. A draft of colder air rose up, smelling of earth and potatoes and neglect. Chato lowered himself through the opening without hesitation. His boots scraped the ladder rungs. When his head disappeared, Sable paused, hand still on the edge. "Chato." He looked up from below, face half in shadow. "Don't bleed out down there," she said. "I won't clean it up." A flicker crossed his expression, something almost like a smile, gone before she could name it. "I'll try not to." She closed the trap door, dropped the sacks back into place. Stood there breathing hard, palms flat on the wood, as though she could hold everything down by sheer will. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Sable straightened fast. Etta Crow appeared at the top landing, wrapped in a faded quilt, gray hair loose around her shoulders. She did not speak at first. She only looked. at the melting snow on the floor, at the open bar on the door, at Sable's face. Then her gaze drifted to the flour sacks, to the slight disturbance in their neat stack. Etta's mouth tightened. She had seen too many winters, too many men come and go through this post, to miss what was right in front of her. But she did not ask. She did not accuse. Instead, she said, very quietly, "You're shaking, child." Sable looked down at her own hands. They were trembling. She clenched them into fists. "I'm fine." Etta studied her a moment longer. Then she turned without another word and went back up the stairs. The door to her room closed with a soft click. Sable stood alone in the flickering light. The store was silent again, except for the wind. And beneath it, so faint she might have imagined it, the scrape of boots shifting on the dirt floor below. She crossed to the window and stared out. The snow had eased, but the night was still black as pitch. Somewhere out there, horses moved. Men moved. Dogs moved. Closer now. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Chato's voice rose in her memory, soft and certain. "I promised I would come back." She had waited a year for those words to mean something. Now they meant everything. And nothing. A low rumble rolled across the valley. Not thunder, not wind. Hooves. More than one horse. Chato's voice drifted up through the floorboards, so quiet it might have been her own thought. "They're here sooner than I thought." Sable did not answer. She only stood there, listening to the sound grow louder, feeling the weight of every choice she had not yet made press down on her like the dark itself. The snow had thickened into a steady, muffling fall by the time the hoofbeats stopped outside. 4 horses, breathing hard, stamped and snorted in the cold. Sable heard the creak of leather as men dismounted, the soft metallic clink of spurs on frozen ground. Then the knock. 3 heavy, deliberate blows against the door that rattled the entire frame. She stood behind the counter, one hand flat on the scarred wood, the other hidden beneath a folded length of calico. Beneath the cloth, her fingers closed around the small colt her father had pressed into her palm 2 summers ago, when the first real trouble with rustlers had come up the valley. The grip was cold, unfamiliar. She had never fired it at anything more dangerous than a tin can behind the barn. "Open the door." The voice outside was deep, clipped, carrying the flat authority of command. "United States Army business. We're looking for a man named Chato." Sable's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she was sure they could hear it through the planks. The sound seemed to fill the entire room, louder than the wind, louder than the dying crackle of the stove. She swallowed once, twice. Her mouth tasted like iron. She glanced toward the back of the store. The flour sacks sat innocent and undisturbed. Beneath them, Chato was silent. No scrape of boot, no shift of weight. He knew better than to move. Another knock, sharper. Sable forced her legs to carry her forward. Each step felt like walking through deep water. She lifted the bar, pulled the door open just wide enough to stand in the gap. A gust of snow swirled in, stinging her cheeks. Major Cade Rourke filled the doorway. He was taller than she remembered from the few times he had passed through last summer. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, except for a neat cavalry mustache. Blue uniform coat buttoned against the cold. Behind him, 3 troopers waited, carbines slung, faces red from wind and impatience. One held the reins of 4 horses, their breath steamed white in the lantern light spilling from the open door. "Miss Kane," Rourke said. No smile, no warmth, only the steady regard of a man who had already decided what questions he would ask and what answers he would accept. We're tracking an Apache. Dangerous man. Goes by Chato. You seen anyone tonight? Sable met his eyes. They were gray, unblinking, the kind of eyes that had looked into too many lies to be fooled by hesitation. No, Major. Her voice came out steady. Too steady. No one's come through since before dark. Storms kept folks home. She felt the sweat prick along her spine despite the cold pouring in. A single drop slid between her shoulder blades, slow and icy. The colt under the cloth felt heavier by the second, as though it knew she was lying. Rourke studied her for a long beat. Then he stepped inside without being invited. The troopers stayed mounted, watching. Snow melted off his boots in small, dark spots on the floorboards. Mind if we take a look around? He asked. It wasn't really a question. Sable stepped aside. Of course. He moved past her, boots deliberate on the wood. The other three dismounted and followed, spreading out like men who had searched 100 empty buildings and expected this one to be no different. One went to the shelves of canned goods, another toward the back storeroom. Rourke himself walked the length of the counter, gloved hand trailing along the edge. Sable stayed where she was, forcing herself to breathe slow and even. Every instinct screamed at her to glance toward the flour sacks. She didn't. She watched Rourke instead. Watched the way he paused at the display of small trade items. Tin cups, iron nails, a shallow basket of beads and braided leather. His fingers brushed the leather bracelet Chato had left her last spring. A simple band of deer hide strung with turquoise and one small hawk feather. She had kept it there, hidden among the other trinkets, because taking it upstairs felt too much like admitting it mattered. Rourke lifted it between thumb and forefinger, turned it once in the lantern light. The feather caught the glow, soft and tawny. Fine work, he said quietly. Apache, isn't it? Sable's stomach lurched. We trade with whoever comes through, Major. Doesn't mean anything. He set the bracelet down exactly where it had been. His gaze lifted to hers again. Longer this time. Searching. She felt it like a physical weight. True enough, he said at last. Still, if you see anything, tracks, smoke, a man who doesn't belong, you fire 3 shots. We'll hear them. We'll come. He turned toward the door. The troopers fell in behind him, silent, efficient. One of them, the youngest, glanced back at Sable once, curious, almost pitying. Then they were gone. The door closed with a solid thud. The bar dropped into place. Outside, horses shifted. Saddles creaked. Voices murmured low. Hooves moved off at a walk, muffled by the snow. Sable stood frozen until the sound faded to nothing. Only then did she let her breath out in a single, ragged rush. She crossed to the counter, lifted the cloth. The Colt lay there, unfired, untouched. Her hand shook so badly she had to brace it against the wood to pick it up. She slid it into the deep pocket of her apron and pressed both palms flat on the counter, leaning forward until her forehead rested on her forearms. The store was quiet again. Too quiet. Beneath her feet, nothing moved. No sound from the cellar. Chato was still there. Alive, hidden, waiting. She straightened slowly, walked to the window, and stared out into the white blindness of the night. The snow fell thicker now, erasing the tracks the soldiers had left, erasing everything. But she knew they hadn't gone far. Somewhere out there, Major Rourke was listening for 3 shots that would never come. And somewhere beneath her feet, a man she had once loved waited for the lie she had just told to either save him or destroy them both. Sable closed her eyes. The wind rose again, rattling the panes. and in the silence that followed, she heard the faint, unmistakable creak of floorboards settling, not from above, but below. He was still there. And so was she. The trapdoor closed above her with a soft, final thud, and the darkness below swallowed everything but the small flame of the oil lamp Sable carried. She descended the short ladder one careful rung at a time, the hem of her skirt brushing the rough dirt wall. The air down here was colder, heavier, earth and old potatoes and the faint sourness of damp wood. It smelled like secrets no one wanted to keep. Chato sat against the far wall, knees drawn up, back braced on the uneven dirt. The lamplight reached him in a thin, wavering pool, catching the sharp line of his jaw and the fresh bandage she had tied around his forearm upstairs. The cloth was already spotting dark again. He had taken off his coat. It lay folded beside him like a shed skin. His shirt sleeve was rolled to the elbow, exposing the long, ugly gash that had reopened sometime in the last few days, jagged edges, swollen, the skin around it hot-looking even in the dim glow. He looked up as her boots touched the floor. No surprise in his face, only that same steady regard that made her feel seen in ways she had spent a year trying to forget. Sable set the lamp on an overturned crate. The light steadied, throwing long shadows across the low ceiling. She knelt in front of him without speaking. The dirt was cold through her stockings. "You're bleeding through," she said. "I know." She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the clean strip of muslin she had torn from an old petticoat earlier that evening. Her hands felt clumsy, unsteady. She unfolded the cloth and hesitated. Chato watched her. "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't." But she leaned forward anyway. When her fingers brushed his arm, she felt the heat of his skin before she even touched the wound. The contact jolted through her like a spark off dry wool. Sudden, sharp, remembered. She froze for half a heartbeat. This was the first time she had touched him in over a year. Not the brush of fingertips in a stolen moment by the river, not the careful press of foreheads under moonlight. This was skin on skin, necessary, intimate in a way that made her throat close. She forced herself to keep moving. She unwound the old bandage slowly. The cloth stuck in places where blood had dried. She peeled it away as gently as she could, wincing when he drew a short breath through his teeth. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't be." The gash was worse than she had thought, deeper than a knife slip, more like something torn by barbed wire or a glancing bullet. She swallowed the bile that rose in her throat and began to wrap the fresh muslin. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, from memory, from the way his pulse beat steady and strong under her touch, the same rhythm she had once fallen asleep listening to, against her ear. Chato's hand came up slowly, deliberately. He closed it around her wrist. Not tight, just enough to still the shaking. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sable's breath hitched. She looked up at him, really looked. The scar on his cheek looked raw in the lamplight. There were new hollows under his eyes, new lines carved by too many nights without rest. But the way he looked at her hadn't changed. Not at all. She pulled her hand free, too fast, too abrupt, and finished the knot with quick, jerky motions. "There, it'll hold till morning." He flexed his arm once, testing. "Thank you." She sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how close they were, how small the cellar felt. The lamp flame dipped, throwing their shadows against the wall, two shapes leaning toward each other, almost touching. "You can't stay down here forever," she said. "I know. They'll come back. Rourke isn't the kind to let a trail go cold. I know that too." She looked away, toward the ladder, toward the trap door that separated them from the world above. "If they find you here, they won't blame you," he said quietly. "Not if I'm gone by dawn." She laughed once, a small, broken sound. "You think they'll believe I didn't know? That I didn't help?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "They'll believe what they want to believe. Always have." Sable pressed her lips together. She thought of Etta's eyes on the stairs, of the way Thane Boone would look at her if he ever found out, of the whispers that would follow her name through every trading post from here to Silver City. Traitor. Squaw man's woman. Worse. And yet here she was, kneeling in the dirt with a wanted man, bandaging his arm like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She started to rise. Chato's voice stopped her. "Sable." She paused, half standing. "If you want me gone at first light, I'll go. No questions. No argument." She looked down at him. The lamplight made his eyes look almost black. She remembered those eyes watching her from across the riverbank last spring, when the cottonwoods were shedding white like snow. She remembered how safe she had felt then, how impossible it seemed that anything could ever tear them apart. She wanted to say yes. Send him away. Lock the trap door. Pretend none of this had happened. But the word wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered, "Stay till morning. Just till the snow stops." He nodded once. Nothing more. She picked up the lamp and started up the ladder. At the top, she paused, looking back. He hadn't moved. He sat exactly as she had left him, back against the wall, eyes on her, waiting. She closed the trap door. Upstairs, the store was dark except for the low red glow of the stove. She crossed to the window again. The snow fell in thick, silent sheets, erasing the night. Then, soft but unmistakable, a knock sounded at the front door. Not heavy like Rourke's. Lighter. Persistent. From the landing above, Etta Crow's voice drifted down, calm and careful. "Sable, there's someone at the door." Sable stood frozen, lamp still in her hand, the flame trembling. The knock came again. Quiet, patient, as though whoever stood outside knew exactly who was listening. And in the silence that followed, she felt the weight of every lie she had told tonight settle deeper into her bones. She did not move to answer. Not yet. The first gray light of dawn crept through the small, high window of the kitchen, turning the steam from the coffee pot into faint silver threads. The room smelled of fresh ground beans, wood smoke, and the lingering sourness of last night's stew. Sable sat at the scarred pine table, elbows on the wood, hands wrapped around a tin mug she hadn't yet touched. Her eyes felt gritty, heavy with the hours she had spent staring into the dark, listening for sounds from below the floorboards. Sleep had come in fragments. Sharp, useless snatches that left her more tired than before. Etta Crow moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a woman who had risen before sunrise every day for 40 years. She poured coffee into 2 mugs without asking if Sable wanted any. The pot clinked against the rim. She set 1 mug in front of Sable and took the chair opposite, folding her hands around her own cup as though warming them against more than just the cold. Neither spoke for a long minute. The stove popped softly. Outside, the snow had stopped falling sometime in the night, leaving the world muffled and still. Etta broke the quiet first. Jory Vale was here just after first light, came for flour and a sack of coffee beans. Boy looked like he hadn't slept either. Sable's fingers tightened on the handle of the mug. She kept her eyes on the dark surface of the coffee. He talked more than usual, Etta went on. Her voice stayed even, almost conversational. Said his Gage is putting together a group, local men, They're riding out today, maybe tomorrow. Word is there's $500 on Chato's head now. Dead or alive. Gage says the army's too slow. Says they'll handle it themselves. The words landed like stones in still water. Sable felt the ripples move through her chest, cold and spreading. $500. Enough to buy a good ranch, or pay off a lifetime of debts, or simply make a man feel righteous for pulling a trigger. She forced her voice to stay level. People talk, doesn't mean anything will come of it. Etta lifted her mug, took a slow sip. She set it down again with care. Maybe. But Gage Vale isn't one for idle talk. And Jory looked scared. Not of the Apache, of his own father. Sable stared into her coffee. The surface trembled faintly from the tremor in her hands. She thought of the trap door, the man beneath it, the bandage she had tied with shaking fingers only hours ago. She thought of how easy it would be to walk upstairs, wake up like any other morning, pretend the night had never happened. She wanted that so badly her throat ached with it, a quiet life. No knocks in the dark, no lies to swallow, no blood on the floorboards. Etta watched her across the table. The older woman's face was lined, weary, but the eyes were sharp, too sharp to miss the shadows under Sable's, the way her shoulders stayed hunched as though bracing for a blow. "You going to tell me what's under the floor?" Etta asked quietly. Sable's breath caught. She looked up, startled. "I don't." Etta raised one hand, palm out. "Don't lie to me, child. Not after all these years." The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. The stove's heat pressed against Sable's back, but she still felt cold. She opened her mouth, closed it again. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. "Chato is here. I hid him. I lied to Major Rourke. I'm scared. I'm so scared." But saying it would make it real, would make Etta part of it, would make her father's housekeeper, maybe the closest thing to a mother she had left, carry the weight of a secret that could ruin them all. "I don't know anything about him," Sable said. The words came out flat, rehearsed. "I haven't seen anyone." Etta held her gaze for a long, searching moment. Then she sighed, a small, tired sound, and looked down at her coffee. "I've watched you stand at that window every night for a year," she said. "Same spot, same look on your face? Don't think I'm blind, Sable Kane. I've seen hearts break before. I know what it looks like when someone's waiting for a ghost to come back." Sable felt heat rise in her cheeks. Shame, anger, something softer she didn't want to name. She wanted to argue, wanted to say she had moved on, that she was fine, that none of this mattered anymore. But the lie wouldn't stretch that far. Etta reached across the table. Her hand, rough, spotted with age, covered Sable's. The touch was light, steady. "I won't speak of it," Etta said. "Not to your father, not to anyone. But whatever you're hiding down there, it's not going to stay hidden forever. And when it comes out, child, it's going to cost more than you think." Sable stared at their joined hands. Etta's fingers were warm, safe. For a moment she wanted to turn hers over, grip hard, confess everything, let someone else carry it for a while. She didn't. She only nodded once, small and tight. Etta squeezed her hand once, then let go. She stood, carried her mug to the sink, and began rinsing it with slow, careful motions. Sable stayed seated. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. Outside, the world was beginning to wake. A horse nickered in the corral. Somewhere down the valley a rooster crowed, thin and defiant. Then came the sound she had been dreading. Hooves on the frozen trail. Not many. 2, maybe 3 horses. Coming steady. Coming back. Sable rose slowly. She crossed to the narrow window that looked out over the front yard. Through the frost-rimmed glass she saw them. Major Cade Rourke in the lead, coat buttoned high, face set like stone. 2 troopers behind him, carbines across their saddles. Their horses steamed in the cold morning air. They were riding straight for the trading post. Sable felt her pulse kick hard against her throat. She glanced toward the hallway, toward the trap door hidden beneath the flour sacks. Etta had gone still at the sink. She didn't turn around. The hoofbeats grew louder. Sable stood there, hands clenched at her sides, watching the riders draw nearer, knowing that whatever came next, the quiet she had clung to all night, was already breaking apart. And she still didn't know what she would say when they knocked. The knock came again. 3 measured raps, heavier this time, carrying the weight of impatience. Sable felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. She straightened her apron with hands that refused to stop trembling, smoothed the front of her skirt, and walked to the door. Each step across the floorboards sounded too loud in the quiet store. She lifted the bar and opened the door. Major Cade Rourke stood on the threshold, snow dusting the shoulders of his blue coat. Behind him, 2 troopers waited with their horses, breath steaming in the cold. But what stopped Sable cold was the dog. A lean, gray-muzzled hound on a short leather leash, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the doorway. The animal's ribs showed under its short coat, and its tail never moved. "Miss Kane," Rourke said. No greeting, no pleasantries. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The dog followed at heel, nails clicking on the wood. "We're back. Trail's gone cold outside, but the dog's telling a different story." Sable closed the door behind him. The latch dropped with a small, final sound. She moved behind the counter, fingers curling into the folds of her skirt, gripping hard enough to feel her nails bite through the fabric. She forced her face to stay calm, open, polite, the way she greeted every customer who walked through that door. Rourke unfolded a creased map across the counter, weighted the corners with 2 brass cartridges he pulled from his belt. The paper smelled of tobacco and horse sweat. He tapped a finger on the ridgeline to the north. "We picked up tracks here last night. Faded fast in the snow. But the dog caught something. Blood, maybe. Or fear." The hound lifted its head, nostrils flaring. It turned toward the back of the store, toward the counter, toward the flour sacks. A low, throaty growl started in its chest and built until the sound filled the room. Sable's stomach turned over. Rourke smiled. Small, thin, without warmth. "He smells blood. Apache blood. Old, but fresh enough." She swallowed. "We butcher our own meat here, Major. Deer, elk, when we can get it. Blood gets tracked in on boots all the time." "Maybe." He straightened. "Mind if we look again? Thorough this time." She wanted to refuse, wanted to say the storm had kept everyone away, that no one had come, that the dog was wrong. But the words died before they reached her lips. She knew how it would sound. Too quick, too desperate. "Of course," she said. Her voice came out thin, almost polite. "Look wherever you need." Rourke nodded to the troopers. They spread out, one to the storeroom, one to the shelves of canned goods and bolts of cloth. The Major himself walked the length of the counter again, slower this time, eyes moving over every inch. The dog stayed close to his heel, nose low, pulling gently at the leash. Sable followed a step behind, keeping her distance, watching the way Rourke moved. Deliberate, patient, the way a man hunts something he already knows is there. She noticed how his gaze lingered on the flour sacks, how his boot paused just above the spot where the trap door lay hidden. Her heart slammed so hard she was sure he could hear it. The dog barked once, sharp, urgent, and lunged toward the counter. Rourke let the leash play out a foot. The hound's nose pressed against the floorboards, snuffling along the seam where the trap met wood. Sable felt the floor tilt under her feet. She forced herself to breathe. "Easy," Rourke murmured to the dog. He crouched, gloved hand running over the boards. "What have you got, boy?" Sable's eyes flicked down. There. Small, dark, almost invisible against the grain. A single dried drop of blood. Chato's blood. It must have seeped through the bandage while he waited below, a tiny betrayal left behind when she closed the trap. Rourke's fingers were inches from it. Without thinking, Sable shifted her weight. Her boot slid forward, covering the spot. The sole pressed down on the drop, grinding it into the wood. Rourke paused. His head turned slowly. He looked up at her, first at her face, then at her foot. For one endless second, neither moved. Then he rose, brushing dust from his knees. The dog whined once, confused, and sat back on its haunches. "Show me the back storeroom," Rourke said. Sable nodded. Too quickly. "This way." She led him past the counter, through the narrow doorway into the storeroom. Barrels of flour, sacks of beans, crates of tools. The air here smelled of burlap and dust and old iron. She pointed out shelves, opened a crate of nails, moved a stack of blankets. Anything to keep his attention away from the front. Rourke followed, asked questions she barely heard. His voice was calm, almost courteous, but she felt the weight of every glance he sent toward the doorway behind them. When they returned to the main room, the other troopers were waiting. Nothing. No tracks, no sign. The dog had gone quiet, sitting by the door with its ears flat. Rourke folded his map. He looked at Sable again. Longer this time, eyes searching hers like he was trying to read something written in small print. "You're a smart woman, Miss Kane," he said quietly. "But smart can be a heavy load sometimes, especially out here." She met his gaze. Her throat was dry. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He touched the brim of his hat. "If you see anything at all, 3 shots. We'll come." He turned toward the door. The troopers followed. The dog rose and padded after them, tail low. Rourke paused on the threshold. "I'm leaving one man here, just in case. He'll be outside. Won't bother you unless he has to." The door closed behind them. Sable stood in the sudden quiet. She heard the horses move off, heard one rider dismount and settle somewhere near the corral. Heard the faint creak of a saddle as the soldier made himself comfortable. She walked to the window and looked out. The trooper sat on a stump near the woodpile, carbine across his knees, eyes on the front door. Her hand went to her throat. She felt her pulse there, fast, unsteady. Under her feet, the floorboards were silent, but she knew Chato was listening, and she knew the soldier outside was listening too. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. The cold seeped into her skin. For a long moment she stood there, watching the snow begin to fall again. Soft, relentless, covering everything. She still hadn't decided what she would do when night came. But the soldier outside had already made his choice. And so had the man beneath the floor. The moon hung low and thin over the Chiricahua foothills, its light cold and blue across the unbroken snow. Sable slipped out the back door of the trading post just after midnight, the hinges giving only the smallest whisper as she eased them shut behind her. She had waited until Etta's breathing steadied into the slow rhythm of sleep upstairs, until the soldier posted outside had settled against the woodpile with his carbine across his knees, head nodding toward his chest. She carried a small lantern hooded with a scrap of burlap to keep the flame from carrying too far. The wick was turned low, throwing a dim, trembling circle at her feet. Her boots sank into the fresh powder with soft, sucking sounds. Each step felt like a betrayal. Of Etta, of her father, of the quiet life she had tried so hard to rebuild. The cold bit through her coat, sharp as a blade against her cheeks. She followed the faint line of the ridgeline creek, half frozen now, its water murmuring under thin ice. The sound was the only thing that kept her moving forward, something steady in a night that felt ready to shatter. She had told herself she only wanted to talk, to ask him why he had come back now, when the noose was already tightening, to demand he leave before the soldier outside woke and noticed her gone, to convince herself she could still send him away and sleep without ghosts. But deep down she knew the truth was simpler and more dangerous. She needed to see his face one more time, without walls or lies between them. Half a mile from the post, the creek bent around a stand of scrub pine. She stopped there, breath fogging white, lantern held low. The moon painted everything silver, snow, branches, her own trembling hands. She almost turned back. Then a shadow separated from the trees. Chato stepped into the light. He had come without his coat, shirt sleeves rolled despite the cold, rifle cradled in the crook of one arm. The weapon was not his, too new, army issue, the bluing still bright under the moon. He did not raise it, did not even shift his grip. He only stood there, watching her. Sable's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She had not expected him to be armed, had not expected the sight of it to make her stomach twist the way it did. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly. "Neither should you." He took one step closer. Snow crunched under his boots. "The soldier's asleep, for now." She glanced back toward the post, though it was hidden by the rise and the dark. "He'll wake, or someone will see the lantern. Then speak fast." She set the lantern on a flat rock. The flames steadied, throwing their shadows long across the snow. She wrapped her arms around herself, not against the cold, but against the words that were rising in her throat. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she said. "I told myself I came to tell you to leave, to say I can't do this anymore. But Her voice cracked. "I needed to see you, without the floor between us, without Rourke's boots overhead." Chato studied her face. The scar on his cheek looked raw in the moonlight. "I came to ask you one last time," he said. "Go with me, or stay." The words hung between them, simple and brutal. She felt the ground shift under her feet. Not snow, but something deeper. Everything she had tried to hold on to, her father's name, Etta's trust, the quiet mornings behind the counter, felt suddenly fragile, like ice too thin to bear weight. "Go with you where?" she whispered. "Into the mountains? Across the border? Running until there's nowhere left to run? Somewhere they can't follow. Not forever." She laughed once, a small, broken sound. "You make it sound easy." "It's not." His voice stayed low, steady. "But staying here is no safer. Not for you. Not anymore." She looked away, toward the creek. The ice cracked faintly under its own weight. She remembered last spring, the two of them sitting on this same bank, water clear and fast, his hand brushing hers like it meant nothing and everything. She remembered how she had believed, really believed, that love could be enough to keep the world at bay. Now the world was here, in the shape of hoofprints in the snow, in the price on his head, in the soldier dozing by the woodpile. "I'm scared," she said. The admission came out raw, almost a whisper. "Not just of them, of what happens if I choose you, of what happens if I don't." Chato did not move closer. He only watched her, eyes dark and unreadable. "I know." She lifted her gaze to his. "Do you? Do you know what it means to lose everything? My father's name, Etta's trust, the only home I've ever had. And for what? A promise you might not be able to keep?" "I know what it costs," he said. "I've paid it every day since I left you." Silence fell again. Long, heavy, filled with the soft gurgle of water under ice and the distant, faint baying of dogs. Gage Vale's hounds. Not close yet, but closer than yesterday. Sable's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to reach for him, wanted to push him away, wanted both at once, and neither. Chato shifted his weight. The rifle barrel caught the moonlight for a second, glinting cold. "I won't ask again after tonight," he said. "If you say stay, I stay until they come. If you say go, I go. But you have to say it." She opened her mouth. No sound came. The dogs bayed again, sharper, nearer. Then a new sound. Boots on snow, deliberate, coming from the trees to her left. Sable turned. Major Cade Rourke stepped into the moonlight, revolver already drawn, barrel steady on Chato's chest. "I knew you were here, Miss Kane," he said. His voice was calm, almost regretful. "You should have fired the 3 shots when you had the chance." Chato did not move. His rifle stayed low, finger off the trigger. Sable stood between them, lantern flickering at her feet, heart hammering so loud she thought the night itself could hear it. Rourke's eyes never left Chato's face, but his next words were for her. "Step aside, Miss Kane. This ends tonight." The moon rode low over the frozen creek, its light splintering across the thin sheet of ice and the fresh snow that had begun to fall again. Soft, relentless flakes drifting like ash. Sable stood rooted on the bank, the lantern forgotten at her feet, its small flame guttering in the cold draft. The world had narrowed to this single strip of frozen water, the 3 of them caught in its pale glow. Major Cade Rourke stood between her and Chato, boots planted wide in the snow. His revolver was steady, the barrel leveled at the center of Chato's chest. The hammer was back. The cylinder gleamed dully. Rourke's face was calm. Too calm. The face of a man who had already made peace with what came next. Chato had not moved. His rifle hung loose at his side, barrel pointed at the ground. He had lowered it the instant Rourke stepped from the shadows. No sudden motion. No threat. Just the quiet choice to keep his hands visible, to keep Sable out of the line of fire. "You shouldn't have come out here alone, Miss Kane," Rourke said. His voice carried across the narrow space, low and measured. "You shouldn't have come out here at all." Sable's breath came in shallow bursts, fogging white in front of her face. Her heart hammered so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, back to the post, back to the safety of walls, and Etta's quiet disapproval, and her father's name still clean on the ledger books. But she couldn't move. Rourke's eyes flicked to Chato, then back to her. "You've been hiding him. All this time. That's treason, Miss Kane. Harboring an enemy of the United States. You know what that means." She knew. She had known the moment she let Chato down into the cellar, the moment she lied to Rourke's face, the moment she stepped out into the night tonight. Every step had carried a price, and now the bill was due. Rourke shifted his stance slightly, thumb resting on the hammer. "I don't want to hurt you, but this ends here. Step aside." Chato's voice cut through the cold. Quiet, even. "She's not part of this, Major. Let her walk away." Rourke's mouth twitched. She made herself part of it the second she opened that trapdoor. Sable felt the words land like a slap. Her hands shook at her sides. She could still turn. She could step back. She could let Rourke do what soldiers did, end things cleanly, quickly. She could go home, lie to Etta, lie to her father when he returned. Live with the silence that would follow, the empty space where Chato had once been. She could keep what was left of her life, or she could lose it all. Her right hand moved before her mind caught up. It slid inside the pocket of her coat, fingers closing around the small Colt. The grip was cold, slick with sweat. Her father had given it to her 2 years ago, when the first whispers of Apache raids reached the valley. "For protection," he'd said, "in case I'm not here." She had never thought she would use it. Not like this. Her hand came out slowly. The revolver shook in her grasp, shook so badly the barrel wavered. She raised it anyway, pointing it at Rourke's back. "Lower your weapon, Major." The words came out louder than she expected. Steady. No tremor left in her voice. Rourke froze. For the first time since he stepped from the shadows, surprise cracked across his face. Sharp, genuine. He turned his head just enough to see her over his shoulder. The revolver in his hand never wavered from Chato's chest. "Miss Kane," he said slowly, "you don't want to do this." "I don't want any of this," she said. Her arm ached from holding the gun steady. "But I won't watch you kill him." The snow kept falling. Soft, silent, collecting on Rourke's shoulders, on Chato's hair, on the barrel of her Colt. The creek murmured beneath the ice, indifferent. Rourke exhaled through his nose. "You pull that trigger, you're done. No going back. No explanations. Your father's name dragged through every post from here to Tucson. Etta Crow won't be able to look at you. The army won't forget." "I know," she whispered. "Then put it down." She didn't. Chato's eyes met hers across the distance. There was no plea in them. No demand. Only the same quiet certainty he had carried since the night he walked back into her life. Rourke started to turn fully toward her. In that instant, Chato moved, not fast, not reckless, but sure. He dropped the rifle and lunged low, shoulder driving into Rourke's midsection. The Major's revolver discharged, a sharp, flat crack that split the night. The bullet went wild, kicking up snow a yard to the left. The two men went down hard, rolling across the frozen bank. Rourke's revolver spun free, skittering across the ice. Chato pinned him, forearm across the Major's throat, not choking, just holding. Rourke thrashed once, twice, then went still, breathing hard through his nose. Sable stood where she was, gun still raised, barrel pointed at nothing now. Her arm shook, her ears rang from the shot. Snowflakes melted on her lashes, blurring the scene. Chato looked up at her. Snow clung to his hair, to the scar on his cheek. His eyes were steady. "Sable." She lowered the Colt. It felt heavier than it had a moment ago. She let it fall to her side. Rourke lay pinned beneath Chato, face red, eyes burning with something colder than hate. "You're finished," he rasped. "Both of you." Chato didn't answer. He only looked at Sable, waiting. She stared at the revolver in her hand, at the man on the ground, at the snow falling silently around them all. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The night was very quiet now, except for the creak of ice on the creek and the ragged breathing of the man beneath Chato. And somewhere in the distance, faint but growing, the sound of dogs. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, as though the night itself were trying to cover what had just happened. A small patch near Chato's shoulder had already turned dark red, the blood seeping through the fresh bandage Sable had tied only hours ago. It wasn't much, more a graze than a wound, but it stained the white ground in ugly, spreading blooms. Major Cade Rourke lay sprawled on his back, arms limp, face slack. A thin trickle of blood ran from his temple where Chato's fist had connected, not to kill, just to silence. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. The revolver he had dropped lay a few feet away, half buried in snow, the barrel still warm enough to melt a small circle around it. Sable stood frozen, the Colt still in her right hand. Her arm ached from holding it up so long. Her fingers were numb, the grip slippery with sweat and melting flakes. She stared at the revolver as though it belonged to someone else, as though the woman who had raised it at a United States officer had been someone braver, someone she no longer recognized. The shot still rang in her ears, a flat crack that had torn through the quiet and left everything changed. Chato rose slowly from where he had pinned Rourke. He did not look at the unconscious man. He only looked at her. "Sable," he said again. Soft, urgent. She blinked. The world came back in pieces, the cold biting her cheeks, the faint gurgle of the creek under ice, the smell of gunpowder hanging sharp in the air. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts that fogged white and vanished. Her voice cracked. She swallowed. "I just pointed a gun at a major, at an army officer." Chato stepped toward her. Snow crunched under his boots. "You saved my life." She shook her head once, small, jerky. "No, I couldn't let him shoot you. That's all it was." He reached out slowly, palm up. She looked at his hand, calloused, scarred, steady, and then at the revolver in hers. The metal felt foreign now, heavy with what it had almost done. From the ridge above them, faint but growing, came the sound of voices, sharp, alarmed. "Major? Major Rourke!" Boots pounded on snow. Lantern light flickered between the trees. 2, maybe 3 troopers running down the slope, drawn by the gunshot. Sable's stomach lurched. They would see Rourke on the ground. They would see Chato standing over him. They would see her, with a gun in her hand, snow on her coat, guilt written across her face. There would be no explaining this away. Not tonight. Not ever. Chato's voice cut through the rising panic. "We have to go, now." She stared at him. "Go where?" "Anywhere but here." The voices were closer, shouts now, urgent. "Over there, by the creek!" Sable looked down at the Colt again. Her fingerprints were on it. Her father had taught her how to clean it, how to load it, how to aim it. He had never taught her what to do when she pointed it at a man wearing the same blue coat he had once worn himself. She opened her fingers. The revolver slipped from her grasp and fell into the snow with a soft thud. She did not pick it up. Chato did not wait for her to speak. He took her hand, firm, warm, steady, and pulled her toward the trees on the far side of the creek. She stumbled after him, boots slipping on the ice, breath burning in her throat. They crossed the frozen water in 3 quick steps. The ice groaned under their weight, but held. On the other bank, the forest thickened. Pine and scrub oak, shadows deep enough to hide in. Behind them, the shouts grew sharper. "There! 2 of them!" A dog bayed. Gage Vale's hounds, closer than the soldiers. The sound cut through the night like a knife. Chato did not slow. He led her deeper into the trees, weaving between trunks, stepping where the snow was thinnest. Sable followed, lungs burning, skirts catching on branches. She did not look back. They had gone perhaps 100 yards when Chato stopped suddenly, pulling her behind the thick bole of a ponderosa. He pressed her back against the rough bark, shielding her with his body. She could hear them now, boots crashing through snow, lanterns swinging, voices calling Rourke's name. The dog's baying turned frantic. Chato's hand tightened on hers. He leaned close, mouth near her ear. "From here," he said, "there is no road back." She looked up at him. Snowflakes had caught in his lashes, in the scar on his cheek. His eyes were dark, steady. waiting. She thought of the trading post. Warm lamplight, Etta's quiet footsteps upstairs, her father's ledger open on the counter. She thought of the life she had known, small and safe and empty. She thought of the revolver lying in the snow behind them, fingerprints already filling with fresh powder. She nodded once. Small. Final. Chato exhaled, a short, quiet sound. Then he pulled her forward again. They ran. The forest swallowed them, branches whipping past, snow falling thicker now, muffling their footsteps. Behind them the shouts grew fainter, but did not stop. The dogs kept baying. Far across the valley, at the edge of the trading post yard, a figure stood in the open doorway. Etta Crow, wrapped in a shawl, gray hair loose in the wind. She had heard the shot. She had seen the lantern light move toward the creek. She had watched two shadows disappear into the trees. She did not call out. She only stood there, arms folded tight across her chest, staring after them until the snow and the dark hid them completely. Then she turned and went back inside. The door closed with a soft, final click, and the night kept falling, heavier than before. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Darkness pressed in like wet cloth, thick and cold, carrying the smell of damp earth, moss, and the faint mineral bite of underground water. Sable's hand stayed locked in Chato's, his grip the only steady thing in a world that had narrowed to the scrape of boots on uneven rock, the drip of unseen water, and the ragged sound of their breathing. The lantern had been left behind at the creek. Too much light, too much risk. They moved by feel and memory, Chato leading, Sable stumbling after, her free hand trailing along the rough wall for balance. The passage had narrowed twice already, forcing them to turn sideways, shoulders scraping stone. Each time she felt the mountain close tighter around her ribs, as though the rock itself were breathing in, deciding whether to let them pass. They reached the small chamber at last, a hollow carved by centuries of water, just wide enough for two people to sit. A thin ribbon of moonlight slipped through a high crack overhead, silver and weak, pooling on the floor like spilled milk. A narrow stream ran along one wall, black and slow, murmuring secrets to the stone. Chato eased down against the wall first, pulling her gently after him. She sank beside him, knees drawn up, back pressed to the same cold rock. Their shoulders touched. She felt the heat of him through her coat, the slow rise and fall of his breathing, the faint tremor in the arm he kept around her. Neither spoke for a long time. Above them, muffled by layers of stone, the night was alive with pursuit. Dogs bayed, distant but unmistakable. Gage Vale's hounds working the scent. Voices carried in fragments. Two sets of tracks, headed for the ridge, spread out. Boots thudded overhead. Lanterns swung. Men cursed the snow and the dark. They knew she had run with him. Sable closed her eyes. The sounds pressed against her skull like fingers. She pictured the trading post, warm lamplight spilling from the windows, Etta's silhouette in the doorway, the soldier by the woodpile waking to an empty yard and a trail leading straight to the creek. She pictured her father's face when he returned from Silver City and heard the story. She pictured the wanted poster that would go up in every saloon from here to the border, her name beside his. Traitor and fugitive, $500 richer for whoever brought them in. The weight of it settled in her chest, heavy as wet snow. She felt Chato shift beside her. He reached across his body with his good hand, probing the bandage on his shoulder. The cloth was damp again, dark with fresh blood. He made a small, impatient sound and began to unwind it. "Let me," she whispered. He hesitated, then let his hand fall away. She worked in the faint moonlight, fingers clumsy with cold and exhaustion. The old bandage peeled away, sticky. The wound beneath was angry, swollen, the edges raw. She tore a strip from the hem of her petticoat, quiet, careful tearing, and wrapped it tight. When her fingers brushed his skin, she felt him tense, then relax. Neither of them spoke of the tremor in her hands. When she finished the knot, he caught her wrist gently, holding it there for a moment. "From now on," he said, voice low, "every step is a choice between living and dying." She looked at him. Really looked. The scar on his cheek stood out sharp in the silver light. His eyes were steady, tired, waiting. She nodded once. For the first time since the creek, she did not argue, did not ask what came next, did not beg for a way back. She only nodded. He released her wrist. She reached into the pocket of her coat and drew out the small leather bracelet, the one he had given her last spring. Braided deer hide strung with turquoise and one hawk feather. It had been tucked against her heart for a year, hidden among the trinkets on the counter, taken out only in secret moments when the house was quiet. She held it in her palm, the feather soft against her skin. Chato watched her. She set the bracelet on the stone floor between them. Careful, deliberate. Then she pushed it gently toward the tunnel mouth they had come through. The feather caught the moonlight one last time, trembling. "The dogs will find it," she said. "They'll think we went that way." Chato's jaw tightened. He did not reach for it. He only nodded. She felt the loss like a small, clean cut, sharp, final. The bracelet had been the last thread connecting her to the girl who used to wait by the window. Now it lay behind them, a false trail, a sacrifice to buy them time. She leaned her head back against the rock and closed her eyes. The baying grew louder, closer, echoing strangely through the stone. Voices shouted orders. Lantern light flickered at the far end of the passage they had left behind, faint but real. Chato rose first, pulling her up after him. "We can't stay," he said. She knew. They moved deeper into the tunnel, away from the light, away from the dogs, away from the voices. The passage sloped downward, the air growing damper, colder. Water dripped somewhere ahead. Steady, patient. Behind them, a small sound drifted through the dark. A pebble shifted, then another. The tunnel gave a low, warning groan, stone settling, or perhaps something more. Chato's hand tightened on hers. They did not look back. They only kept moving. Deeper, darker, into whatever waited ahead. And the mountain, silent and ancient, closed in behind them. The tunnel spat them out just before dawn. They emerged from a narrow fissure in the eastern slope of the Chiricahua, blinking against the sudden pale light that flooded the world. The air changed at once, dry, sharp, carrying the clean scent of pine resin and sun-warmed stone. No more damp rock pressing in, only the vast, open sweep of desert stretching away below them, broken by low ridges and scattered juniper. The sun was still below the horizon, but its glow rimmed the distant peaks in thin gold, turning the snow on the ground to a faint, glittering crust. Sable stumbled out first, one hand braced on the rough lip of the opening. Her skirt was torn at the hem, streaked with mud and pine needles. Her coat hung heavy with damp. She had no gloves. Her fingers were red and cracked from the cold, the skin splitting in fine white lines. Chato followed, rifle slung across his back, his wounded shoulder held stiffly. Blood had seeped through the bandage again during the long crawl. Dark patches on the cloth. But he made no sound of complaint. They stood for a moment without speaking, breathing the open air like people who had forgotten what it tasted like. No horses, no food. Only the rifle Chato had taken from Rourke's fallen hand, a half-full canteen slung at his belt, and the clothes on their backs. The rest had been left behind in the dark. Blanket scraps, the last of the jerky, even the small bundle of matches she had carried. Sable looked east. The desert rolled out in long, rolling waves of sand and rock, empty and merciless under the coming light. Somewhere out there, smoke rose in thin gray threads. 2, maybe 3 columns, too far to make out details. Campfires, perhaps, or signal fires, or men burning brush to drive game, or fugitives into the open. They knew which way the 2 of them had gone. Chato crouched, studying the ground at the mouth of the fissure. He brushed snow away with his good hand, revealing faint prints, boots, paws, the scuff of rifle butts dragged in haste. He traced one track with a fingertip, then looked up at her. "They're still searching," he said. "Not close, but they haven't given up." She nodded. The words didn't surprise her anymore. Nothing surprised her anymore. He rose, wincing as his shoulder took weight, and started down the slope. She followed without being asked. Her boots slipped on loose shale. She caught herself twice, palms scraping rock. Each time she felt the sting of fresh cuts, but she did not stop. At the bottom of the first rise, they found a narrow wash, dry now, but the sand still held the memory of water. A thin trickle ran along one edge, clear and cold. Chato knelt, cupped his hands, drank. Then he looked at her. She knelt beside him. No cup, no canteen of her own. She hesitated. Old habit, the reflex of a girl who had always had a tin mug, a pitcher, a basin. Then she leaned forward, scooped water in her palms, and drank. It tasted of stone and iron, sharp on her tongue. She drank again. Her hands shook. Water spilled between her fingers, dripping onto the sand. She wiped them on her skirt, but the skin stayed raw, the cracks stinging. Chato watched her without comment. She met his eyes. "I'm learning," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Good." They moved on. The sun rose fully, burning off the last of the night's chill. Heat began to gather in the low places, pressing against their skin. Chato walked ahead, pace steady but not fast, measured, careful of his shoulder. Sable followed a step behind, watching how he placed his feet. Heel first on loose rock, weight shifted to the ball when crossing sand, always scanning the ground ahead. She tried to copy him. Her steps were clumsy at first, too heavy, too loud. But she kept trying. He stopped once beside a patch of wind-scoured sand. Crouched. Pointed. "See here." His finger traced a faint depression. Boot heel. Deep. Man carrying weight. Rifle, maybe pack. Going north. 2 hours old, maybe 3. She knelt beside him, studying the print. It looked like nothing at first, just a shallow mark in the sand. But when she looked closer, she saw the pattern. The way the heel dug deeper than the toe, the slight drag on the outside edge. "Gage Vales, man?" she asked. "Or soldiers?" He brushed the print away with the side of his hand. "Doesn't matter. They're looking in the wrong direction, for now." He rose and started walking again. She followed. Later, he showed her another track, Smaller, lighter. Coyote, passed at first light. No threat. She nodded. She was beginning to see what he saw. Not just marks in the dirt, but stories. Direction. Time. Intent. They walked until the sun stood high, then found shade under an overhanging ledge of red rock. Chato checked the rifle, loaded but only 3 rounds left. He handed her the canteen. She drank sparingly, then passed it back. She looked at him. We can't keep this up forever. No food, no water beyond the next wash, and they're still out there. I know. She swallowed. Then what? He met her eyes. South, toward the border. There are places, canyons, hidden valleys, the army doesn't know well. My people used them. Some still do. She thought of the smoke in the distance, thought of the dogs, thought of the revolver she had dropped in the snow, the last piece of her old life. She nodded. We go at night. He studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached out, touched the back of her hand. Brief, light, gone almost before she felt it. You're not what you were, he said quietly. Not anymore. She looked down at her cracked hands, at the dirt under her nails, at the tear in her skirt. She thought of the girl who had stood behind the counter measuring coffee beans, smiling at customers, waiting for letters that never came. That girl was gone. She was someone else now. She didn't know who yet. But she was beginning to learn. They rested in silence, backs against the rock, watching the sun crawl across the sky. The heat built slowly, pressing down. Far off, another thin thread of smoke rose. Closer this time. Chato tensed. Sable followed his gaze. On a low rise to the southeast, perhaps 2 miles distant, a figure stood alone against the sky. Tall, dark against the pale desert. The man raised one arm. Slow, deliberate, making a sign she did not recognize. Apache hand talk. Chato went still. The figure held the sign for a long moment, then lowered his arm and waited. Sable felt Chato's hand find hers again, this time holding, not letting go. Is that? Kael, he said. His voice was low, careful. My cousin. She looked at the distant figure, then at Chato. The man on the rise did not move, neither did they, but the wind carried the faint, unmistakable sound of dogs baying again. Still far, but coming. And the day was only beginning. The sun stood high and merciless by the time they reached the small creek east of the ridge. It was little more than a thin silver thread cutting through the baked red earth, bordered by sparse willow and bunch grass that bent under the heat. The water ran clear but shallow, barely ankle-deep, gurgling over smooth stones worn round by years of patient flow. The air smelled of dry sage and hot rock, undercut by the faint green scent of the willows. Kael waited on the far bank. He stood motionless, rifle cradled in the crook of one arm, eyes sweeping the approach from the trees. Tall, lean, hair tied back with a strip of red cloth, he wore buckskin leggings and a faded calico shirt open at the throat. His face was hard-planed, watchful, the kind of face that had seen too many horizons and trusted few of them. Chato raised a hand, slow, open-palmed, in the old sign. Kael answered with the same gesture, then lowered his rifle barrel toward the ground. Sable felt Chato's hand tighten briefly on hers before he let go. They stepped out from the last line of scrub pine, moving into the open together. She kept her chin up, shoulders square, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had never met any of Chato's people before. Not like this. Not as a fugitive walking beside him into their sight. Kyle gaze moved from Chato to her. It lingered. Measuring, not hostile, but not welcoming either. He spoke first in Apache, low and quick. Chato answered in the same tongue, voice steady. Then Kale switched to English, the words halting but clear. Army pulling north. Sioux trouble up there. They thin out here for now. He nodded toward the horizon. But white men, Gage Vale and his kind, they don't stop. Bounty higher now. They know her name too. Call her Traitor. White woman who runs with Apache. Sable felt the words land like a slap across the face. Traitor. The sound of it echoed inside her skull, mingling with the memory of Etta's quiet warning, of her father's ledger still open on the counter, of the soldier left behind at the post. She swallowed once, hard, and kept her eyes on Kyle. Chato stepped half a pace in front of her, not shielding, just present. We need to move south, fast. Kyle studied Chato's shoulder. The bandage showed fresh blood through the cloth. He jerked his chin toward the creek bank. Sit, let me see. Chato hesitated, then eased down onto a flat rock. Sable stayed standing, arms folded tight across her chest. She watched as Kyle knelt, unwound the bandage with careful fingers. The wound looked worse in daylight. Swollen edges, crusted blood, a thin line of fresh red working its way through. Kyle made a low sound in his throat, not quite a curse. Sable felt heat rise in her cheeks. Shame, not anger. This was a stranger touching Chato, seeing the damage she had tried to mend in the dark. She wanted to step forward, to take over, to say she could handle it. But she stayed still. She had to let this happen. Chato needed it. Kyle pulled a small pouch from his belt, dried herbs wrapped in rawhide. He crushed some between his palms, mixed it with water from the creek, and pressed the paste against the wound. Chato drew a short breath through his teeth but did not flinch. Kyle rebound the arm with a strip of clean cloth from his own pack, knotting it tight. When he finished, Kyle looked up at Sable. His eyes were dark, unreadable. You have spirit of Apache woman, he said in slow, accented English. Stubborn like mountain, flow like water when needed. Chato translated the last part quietly, voice low. Sable felt the words settle somewhere deep in her chest, unexpected, almost gentle. For the first time since the creek, since the shot, since the revolver falling into the snow, a small, tired smile touched her mouth. Not wide. Not happy, just there. Kyle rose. He pointed south, toward the long, hazy line of distant mountains. 3 days to valley. Hidden good, water, game. Some of our people there, old ones, women, children, waiting to move south before winter closes passes. He paused, eyes flicking to Sable again. But if Gage Vale finds trail, if dogs catch scent, we don't make it. Chato stood. He tested his shoulder, rolling it once. We go with you. Kyle nodded once. Then he turned south along the creek, rifle loose in his hand, pace unhurried, but sure. Sable looked at Chato. He met her gaze. Steady. Waiting. She took a breath. The air tasted of dust and sage and the faint iron of blood. She thought of the bracelet she had left behind in the tunnel, thought of the revolver in the snow, thought of Etta standing in the doorway, watching them disappear. She stepped forward. They walked. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning cool. Heat rose from the ground in shimmering waves. The creek dwindled to damp sand, then nothing. They kept to the low places, moving from shadow to shadow. Kale leading, Chato beside her, rifle ready. No one spoke much. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, a single gunshot cracked across the valley. Distant, flat, echoing off the rocks. Not close, but not far enough. Sable did not look back. She only kept walking, south, into the heat and the haze and whatever waited beyond. The valley lay hidden like a secret the mountains had kept for centuries. A narrow cut in the earth near the Mexican border, ringed by high red walls and scattered juniper. It caught just enough water from a spring to keep the grass green and the willows alive. 6 months had passed since the night at the creek, since the shot and the snow and the running that never really stopped. Time here moved differently. Slow, measured by the sun's arc and the rhythm of daily survival. Sable sat cross-legged outside the wickiup, the late afternoon sun warm on her shoulders. Her fingers worked steadily, weaving strips of cattail reed into a shallow basket. The motion had become familiar now. Twist, pull, tuck, each reed sliding into place with quiet purpose. Her belly showed a gentle swell beneath the loose buckskin tunic she wore, the fabric soft from wear, dyed with plant juices to a muted ochre. She had learned to sew it herself, under the patient eyes of the older women in the small band. The tunic smelled faintly of smoke and yucca soap. She no longer flinched at the sound of distant coyotes or the snap of branches in the night. She no longer woke, reaching for a pistol that wasn't there. But the fear had not left. It had simply changed shape. Now it lived deeper, coiled around the small life inside her, whispering questions she could not answer. What world would this child know? What price would it pay for being born between two fires? Hooves thudded softly on the packed earth. Sable looked up. Chato walked toward her from the far end of the valley, a fresh-killed deer slung across his shoulders. The animal's head hung low, antlers catching the light. He moved with the same careful economy she had first noticed in him, shoulder still stiff from the old wound, but stronger now. He carried no rifle today, only his knife at his belt, and the quiet certainty of a man who had learned to live unseen. He lowered the deer beside the fire pit, wiped his hands on his leggings, and came to her. Dust rose in small puffs around his moccasins. He crouched in front of her, dark eyes searching her face the way they always did, as though checking for cracks she might not admit to. "You're tired," he said. "I'm fine." She set the half-finished basket aside. "Just thinking." He nodded once. Then he reached out, palm open, and placed his hand gently on the curve of her belly. His touch was light, almost reverent. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she felt it, a small flutter, quick and certain, like a fish turning in shallow water. Chato's breath caught. His eyes widened slightly, the faintest surprise breaking through the usual calm. "There," he said softly. It moved. Sable smiled, a small, real smile that reached her eyes. "It's been doing that more lately. Strong little thing." He kept his hand there, feeling the next small kick. "It will be a bridge," he said, "between what was and what can be." She looked down at his hand on her, at the scarred knuckles, the faint line of the old wound beneath the sleeve. She thought of the night she had bandaged it in the cellar, of the revolver she had dropped in the snow, of the bracelet she had left behind to fool the dogs. She thought of Etta standing in the doorway, watching them disappear. The smile faded. Chato noticed. "What is it?" She hesitated. Then she reached into the small pouch at her belt and drew out the folded paper. The letter had come yesterday, carried by a trusted trader who moved between the hidden valleys and the border towns. She had read it alone, sitting on this same patch of ground while Chato was out hunting. She had not shown it to him yet. She unfolded it now, fingers careful. The handwriting was Etta's, neat, steady, the same hand that had once taught her how to tally accounts and knead bread. "My dear Sable," she read quietly, "I pray this finds you safe. Your father is still angry, but the anger is quieter now. He asks after you when he thinks no one hears. The wanted notices have faded. The army has other troubles. But your name is still spoken in town. The traitor girl, they call you. Gagevale mentions it when he drinks. Not often, but enough." She paused. Her throat tightened. "I still wait for the day you come home. Even once. Even for an hour. I keep your room as it was. I keep your mother's shawl on the chair. I miss you, child. I always will." She folded the letter again. Her eyes stung. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Chato watched her in silence. When she looked up, he asked, "You didn't tell me." "I didn't want you to feel it was your fault." Her voice was low. "If we go back, even to visit, they'll see us. They'll remember. And this," she rested her hand over his on her belly, "this would be in danger too." He exhaled slowly. "You think I don't know the cost?" "I know you do." She met his eyes. "That's why I didn't show you. Not yet." He nodded once. He did not press. He only sat beside her, shoulder touching hers, watching the light change on the valley walls. Sable tucked the letter back into the pouch. She picked up the basket again, fingers resuming their steady work. Twist, pull, tuck. The reeds slid into place, building something small and useful from nothing. Chato rose after a while. He went to the deer, began skinning it with quick, practiced strokes of his knife. The scent of fresh blood and warm meat rose on the air. Somewhere in the valley, a child laughed, high and sudden, then was quiet. Sable kept weaving. The sun dropped lower, painting the red rock in long gold strokes. The valley grew still, the kind of stillness that felt earned. Then, from the north rim, faint but unmistakable, the slow, deliberate thud of hooves. Not many. 3, maybe 4 horses, moving careful, not fleeing, patrolling. Sable's fingers paused on the reed. Chato stopped mid-cut. He looked toward the sound, then at her. Neither spoke. The hooves continued, steady, unhurried, drawing nearer along the rim trail. The light kept fading, and the valley waited. The sun bled red across the western rim of the valley as the day bled out. Long shadows stretched from the junipers and the high red walls, turning the grass to bruised gold. Sable sat just inside the wickiup, the half-finished basket forgotten in her lap, listening to the ordinary sounds of evening, a child's laugh from the far end of the camp, the soft thud of a pestle grinding corn, the low murmur of women talking by the fire. Then the ordinary broke. A sharp crack split the quiet, distant but unmistakable. A rifle, fired once, testing range or warning. Sable's hands stilled on the reeds. Her heart kicked once, hard. She rose without thinking, reaching for the small skinning knife she kept beside the sleeping robes. The blade was short, sharp, more tool than weapon, but it was all she had learned to use in these months. She slipped it into her belt and stepped outside. The air smelled of cooling stone and wood smoke. The valley lay peaceful in the dying light. Too peaceful. She saw Chato and Kael already moving toward the northern rim, rifles in hand, bodies low. They had seen something. Tracks, perhaps, or dust, or the glint of metal where it should not be. She followed, keeping to the willows along the creek, staying out of sight until she reached the edge where the ground rose sharply. From here she could see the narrow mouth of the valley, its only easy way in or out. 4 riders sat their horses just beyond the first line of rocks. The leader was unmistakable. Gage Vale, thicker around the middle now, beard gone gray. But the same hard set to his jaw she remembered from the times he had come to the trading post for powder and tobacco. He carried a Winchester across his saddle, muzzle down, but ready. The 3 men with him were younger, local men she half recognized, faces from town, from the saloon, from the feed store. They did not look eager. They looked grim. Chato and Kael had taken cover behind a low boulder. Chato glanced back, saw her, and made a small, sharp gesture. Stay low. She did not. She stepped out from the willows into the open ground. Chato's head snapped toward her. His eyes widened. Warning, not anger. She kept walking. The riders saw her. Gage Vale straightened in the saddle. His horse shifted, uneasy. He raised a hand to hold his men back. "Miss Kane," he called. His voice carried clear across the still air. "Didn't expect to see you looking so settled." And she stopped 20 paces from the boulder line, close enough to be heard, far enough that a bullet would have time to whistle before it reached her. "I'm not hiding," she said. Her voice did not shake. "This is my home now." Gage looked past her to Chato and Kael, then back to her. His eyes narrowed at the swell of her belly beneath the tunic. "We ain't here to take prisoners tonight," he said. "Not yet. We're here to warn. We know he's here. We know you're with him. We know there's a child coming." He paused, letting the words settle. "If you hand him over, quiet, no fight, we ride away. No one burns this place. No one touches the women or the old ones. You got my word." Sable felt the knife handle warm against her hip. She thought of the wickiup behind her, of the fire pit, of the children who played without fear here. She thought of Etta's letter, folded in her pouch, the ink still smelling faintly of the trading post. She thought of the revolver she had dropped in the snow 6 months ago. "No," she said. Gage sighed, a tired, disappointed sound. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." One of his men shifted in the saddle. A rifle barrel rose, slow, casual. Chato stepped out from the boulder, rifle leveled. The man fired, not at Chato's chest. A warning shot, aimed high. The bullet snapped past Chato's shoulder, close enough to tug cloth. A splinter of rock flew up, grazed his upper arm. Fresh blood welled instantly, dark against the buckskin. Sable cried out, short, involuntary. Chato did not drop. He only shifted his stance, rifle still steady. Gage raised a hand. "Enough!" The shooter lowered the barrel, sheepish. Sable ran forward, 3 steps, then stopped. She looked at the blood on Chato's arm, at the way he held himself still, refusing to show pain. Gage watched her. His face softened. Just a fraction. "You used to be the girl behind the counter," he said. "Polite, quiet. Now look at you." She met his eyes. "I'm still polite. I'm asking you to leave. This isn't your land anymore." He studied her for a long moment. The light was failing fast. The valley walls had turned deep crimson. Then he shook his head. Once, slow. "You chose the wrong side, girl." He reined his horse around. The others followed. They rode out without another word, horses kicking up small puffs of dust that hung in the twilight. Sable stood there until the sound of hooves faded. Chato lowered his rifle. He walked to her, blood dripping steadily from his arm. She reached for him without thinking, fingers pressing the wound, trying to stop the flow. "Come back to the fire," she said. "Let me clean it." He nodded. They walked back together, slow, silent, through the gathering dark. The women at the wiki-ups watched them pass. No one spoke. No one needed to. At their own fire, Sable knelt. She tore fresh cloth from her spare tunic, boiled water over the coals, washed the graze. The bullet had torn flesh, but not bone. It would scar. Another line to join the others on his body. She bandaged it tight. Her hands were steady now, but when she looked up, tears stood in her eyes. Chato cupped her face with his good hand. "It's nothing," he said. "It's everything," she whispered. They sat there as the stars came out, the fire snapping low. The valley grew quiet again. Too quiet. Sable leaned against him, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She knew the riders would not come back tonight. But she also knew the threat had not ended. It had only changed shape. Somewhere beyond the rim, in the dark, men were still riding. And the price they had paid tonight was only the beginning of what would be asked. The fire had burned down to a small nest of coals, glowing dull red against the night. Sable sat with her back against a rolled blanket just outside the wiki-up, knees drawn up, one hand resting on the gentle rise of her belly. The other hand lay open on Chato's thigh, fingers tracing the edge of the scar that curved over his shoulder. Raised, uneven, the skin still faintly pink where the bullet had torn through 6 months before. She touched it lightly, as she had every night since, feeling the hard ridge beneath her fingertips. Each time she did, the memory came unbidden. The flash of the revolver in her hand, the crack of the shot, Rourke's surprised face turning toward her in the moonlight. The scar was hers as much as his, a mark they both carried. Chato sat beside her, legs stretched toward the coals, arms resting loose across his knees. He had shed his shirt earlier against the lingering heat of the day. The firelight played across the older scars on his chest, and the newer one she kept touching. He did not flinch when her fingers brushed it. He only watched the flames, quiet, letting her map the damage the way she needed to. The desert wind moved through the valley, low, steady, carrying the dry scent of sage and distant juniper, the faint mineral tang of cooling stone. Somewhere farther down the camp, a child's voice rose in sudden laughter, then fell silent. The sound felt fragile, precious, like something borrowed. Sable let her head rest against Chato's shoulder. His skin was warm, still carrying the day's sun. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, to the small crackle of the coals settling. "I don't regret it," she said quietly. He turned his head just enough to look at her. "I know. But I miss her." The words came out small, almost lost in the wind. "Etta. I keep seeing her standing in the doorway that night, watching us run. She didn't call out. She didn't try to stop us. She just let us go." Chato's hand covered hers on his shoulder. His thumb moved once, slow, across her knuckles. "She knew what you chose." Sable opened her eyes. The stars were thick overhead, sharp and cold, the way they only looked in the high desert. She thought of the last letter, folded now in the small leather pouch she kept inside the wiki-up. Etta's careful handwriting, the line that had stayed with her, Your father looks at your old photograph every evening. He doesn't speak of it, but I know he's waiting." No more letters had come. The border trails had grown too dangerous, the traders too wary. Whatever bridge had existed between her old life and this one had been quietly burned. She felt Chato shift slightly. He lifted his chin toward the sky. "They call you Ischiteneba now," he said, "the woman who walks between two fires. You left one to join the other, but you carry both flames inside you." Sable felt the name settle over her like a blanket. Warm, heavy, earned. She had heard the women use it in low voices when they thought she wasn't listening. It was not a title given lightly. She leaned her head harder against him. "I don't feel like I'm carrying anything. I feel like I left most of myself back there." "You didn't leave it," he said. "You brought it. That's why it hurts." She swallowed. Her free hand moved to her belly again, feeling the small, steady presence there. The child had grown quieter tonight, as though listening. She wondered what it would know. Of the trading post, of her father's ledger, of Etta's kitchen, and the smell of fresh bread. She wondered if it would ever know those things, or if they would remain only stories she might one day tell in the dark. Chato's voice came again, softer. "We survived. We chose. The price is still being paid. Every day." She nodded against his shoulder. "I know." They sat in silence after that. The coals popped once, sending a small shower of sparks upward. The wind moved through the valley again, stirring dust, carrying the faint scent of piñon smoke from the other fires. Somewhere a nightbird called, short, mournful, then gone. Sable lifted her head. She looked at Chato. Really looked. At the scar on his cheek. At the new lines around his eyes. At the way he still watched the darkness beyond the firelight. Always watching. She leaned forward and kissed him. Slow, deliberate, tasting salt and smoke and the day's dust. When she drew back, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't know if we'll ever go back," she whispered. "Even to visit. Even once." He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was steady. "If we do it together. If we don't, we make this enough." She nodded. She did not know which path she wanted more. She only knew she could not lose what was here. Not him, not the child, not the fragile piece they had carved out of stone and fear. They sat like that, as the fire burned lower, until the coals were only a faint red pulse in the dark. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses. The wind kept moving, carrying away the last threads of smoke, carrying away the day. Sable rested her head on Chato's shoulder again. Her hand stayed on her belly. His arm came around her. They did not speak again. They only sat, two people who had chosen, who had paid, who were still paying, under a sky that held no promises. And in the quiet, the wind kept blowing, bringing with it the scent of dust and memory, and the knowledge that tomorrow would ask its own price. The coals dimmed, the night deepened, and somewhere far to the north, beyond the rim, a single horse nickered once, soft, distant, then was silent. "Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today." Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.